Asset utilization is how effectively and how efficiently a company uses its assets. What assets a company has is one thing. The other thing is how well does a company use the assets that it has to generate a return. And there's a variety of different measures that a company can look at to measure utilization. And you can look at different assets and ask yourself, how do you measure the efficiency of that asset? For example, for a product company, like a Walmart or maybe a retailer, one of the key assets they might look at is inventory. How well do you use the inventory that you have? And a common measure that we've talked about, and we can see in the glossary here as well, is inventory turnover. It's how much inventory you have is one thing. How well you use that inventory or how quickly you turn through it is a measure of efficiency. That's an asset utilization measure. There's a lot of different types of measures you can look at. If you're thinking about an asset as a factory, you might look at it through the lens of uptime. How often, what percentage of the time is the factory running? You could have a factory, but if it's running 50% of the time, your utilization is 50%. If it's running 87% of the time or 90% of the time and only 10% is for planned downturns, you might be running in a very efficient way. You might look at assets through cycle time of manufacturing or of design products. You might look at utilization at a corporate level of return on assets. How good are we as a company of taking the assets that we have and getting return on assets? You could, in theory, have two companies with the same set of assets and one that operates at a much higher level, gets a much higher level of utilization, and gets a much greater return for the assets that it has. So the reason utilization is so important is it really is a measure of how good is this company, how good is this management team, how good are the employees at taking the assets that it has and getting a return on them, and how well is it utilizing those assets. I have a client, a large public company in the United States, and the CFO of this company has come into my classes a few times. And she describes asset utilization to the employees as a personal example for her. She says, I have 242 pairs of shoes. So I have a lot of shoes. Those are my assets. They're my passions, she says. But I only have one pair of feet. I'm only using 2 shoes at a time. So my utilization is very low. So it's a fun example that kind of highlights it's not necessarily what a company has, but it's also how well a company uses the assets that the company has as well. And again, utilization is a measure of how efficient a company is at generating a return on the assets that it has. Can be measured in many different ways. Inventory turns is a way to look at the efficiency of inventory utilization. Factories might be uptime, an actual asset like a truck, might be miles driven in a month. Any asset can have a measure of utilization that we can look at to ensure that we're getting the best use of the asset that we have.